So I've lived most of my life understanding what happens when power feels threatened. My father, Paul Rusesabagina, whose actions during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda inspired the movie Hotel Rwanda, became a political prisoner for daring to criticize the government of Rwanda and for exposing the human rights abuses being perpetrated by the regime. And for years, my family's advocacy for his freedom placed us in a tense relationship with the state that prefers silence over scrutiny. So I grew up knowing that when you speak out, someone may decide to watch you. But still, nothing prepares you for the moment that you realize that the watching has already been invading. When I learned that the Pegasus spyware had been infected with the Pegasus spyware, the why was painfully clear. I had been campaigning for my father's freedom, meeting with lawmakers, working with journalists, exposing violations, and challenging the narrative around his unlawful detention. And in the eyes of those responsible, that made me someone to monitor. But knowing the motive did not soften the impact. Surveillance steals something from you before it steals information. It steals trust. Trust that your private life is yours. Trust that your laughter with family, your late-night fears, your whispered conversations with friends, your work calls, are not being absorbed by someone you cannot see. So I began replaying months of my life differently, wondering who else had been present when I thought I was alone. And this is the experience shared widely by journalists, activists, dissidents, and anyone who challenges the abuse of power. But the breach is not purely technical, it's deeply human. It's the moment you understand that harm has already crossed your threshold quietly. This is where the ripple begins, with a person realizing that their inner world had been treated as an intelligence target simply because they asked for justice.
My name is Donncha, and I lead the security lab at Amnesty International. We're a team of forensic experts and investigators, and our job is to fight this constant cat-and-mouse battle. We try to watch the watchers, turn the tables on the government hackers who want to try and spy on journalists, activists, and dissidents around the world. Amnesty International first started this work around 10 years ago, as we realized in an increasingly digital world, we would also need our own technologists and hackers to try and fight back against and document human rights abuses that are powered through the use of technology. At the start, activists are coming to us with sometimes quite basic attacks. They'd get a Windows malware trying to hack their phone, hack their computer. They'd get some phishing emails trying to compromise their emails. And a lot of these were trying to just trick the journalists or activists into giving away their passwords. Then we started to see something very concerning that was really shifting the bounds. We saw that there was companies like NSO Group, the maker of Pegasus spyware, who were selling an incredibly dangerous intrusion tool, far more sophisticated than what governments could build themselves. And they were selling this for money to governments around the world who could pay the millions of dollars price tag. And with this spyware, with Pegasus, they didn't need to trick the user anymore. They could simply silently infect somebody's phone, in many cases without even needing to click on a link. And that was exposing the most intimate aspects of a person's life. Their entire world was suddenly an open book for whichever government or agency wanted to see them as a target. Our first hands-on encounter with Pegasus was back in 2018, when actually one of our Amnesty colleagues was themselves targeted with the spyware while they were doing work on Saudi Arabia. We looked at their phone, we looked at the initial Pegasus link they were sent, and from that initial case, we started to identify the telltale traces left behind on a phone that's infected with spyware. So our job then was to try and build some kind of forensic methodology to identify the traces on a phone to prove a phone was infected. So as you can imagine, this is an incredibly complex process, as the whole idea of spyware like Pegasus is that it's undetectable and secret. This involved looking at thousands of log files, databases on a phone, many of them legitimate, and we look for the 1 or 2 entries out of thousands or millions that actually this shouldn't be there. This is a telltale trace that a spyware or hacking has happened on the device. It's like a very complex game of spot the difference that's always getting more difficult over time. But with these initial cases, we started to build a forensic methodology and get a better sense that we could actually detect the spyware when we came across it. I think the challenge then, as always, is to actually figure out who is being surveilled. We're looking in the dark, looking for a needle in a haystack, talking to activists, people kind of at random who might be under threat. And we found a few cases here and there in Morocco, elsewhere. But we, at Amnesty, we were certain that we were only seeing still a tiny part of the picture. We were seeing the tip of the iceberg. But the challenge was we could never prove this. We knew it was out there, but where do we even look? And then I think that all changed one day when, together with Laurent Richard at Forbidden Stories, Amnesty, we received an incredible bombshell leak from a whistleblower who now, for the first time, could tell us exactly who was being targeted with the spyware and where to look. And that's when our job really began to check hundreds of phones around the world and try and figure out the full scope of these kinds of attacks. And as we'll see, it was much more than we could even have imagined ourselves. Laurent.
Forbidden Stories. So as everyone understood what Donncha and Carine just explained, it's not only a technical story, it's a human story. Once you got infected by Pegasus, you are entirely trapped. It's like having one person over your shoulder. We know all your secrets. And together with Amnesty Tech, we received a massive leak, an unprecedented leak. 50,000 phone numbers, journalists, activists, lawyers, dissident political figures. And very quickly, one thing became very obvious, that it was not just a scoop, it was also a very dangerous investigation. I personally started with something very simple, my own contact book, my own address book. We cross-checked phone numbers from my contact with the Pegasus list, and suddenly I saw names I knew. A friend of mine in Azerbaijan, Khadija Ismailova, a journalist we used to work with in Mexico, and close friends in Hungary. And then something even more striking. We saw members of the French government and up to the phone number of the French President Emmanuel Macron. That's the moment I understood the scale of the scandal, the magnitude of the revelations to come, and the extreme danger of holding such a list. Because this list was the list every intelligence services on Earth would want to get their hands on, and because some actors would likely try to stop us from publishing. Facing that kind of risk, being surveilled, being blocked, or being silenced, and knowing the large scale of this investigation, there were only one possible response: to work together, to use our global network of journalists, to share the risk, and to make sure that censorship will be impossible. That's how the Pegasus Project was built. More than 80 journalists from 25 news organizations across Mexico, Hungary, India, the US, France, Germany, and beyond. We organized the work concretely by contacting potential victims, by asking them if they agreed to have their phone analyzed, working with Amnesty Tech on a digital forensic, and very often the result was very clear. We found traces of Pegasus infection. At that point, Pegasus became a geopolitical earthquake. This investigation was dangerous because we were investigating a very secretive company called NSO Group and governments known for imprisoning and killing journalists. The core question was simple and terrifying. How do you investigate surveillance without being surveilled yourself? We had to be creative with Amnesty Tech about the secure communication channels we used and to assume that at some point everything might be compromised. Leading 80 journalists on a spyware global investigation without being detected was a very big challenge for us at Forbidden Stories. Forbidden Stories is an organization I founded 8 years ago. Our mission is to pursue the work of journalists who have been killed, who have been in prison, who have been threatened, but not alone. We do that in a collective way. The logic is simple. When one journalist falls, 50 will rise. So we are sending a strong signal to the enemies of the free press that killing the journalist won't kill the story. In the Pegasus list, we found the number of Cecilio Pineda, a Mexican journalist. His phone had been selected as a Pegasus target, and he was killed some weeks later. We also discovered that Atiche Sengiz, the fiancé of Jamal Khashoggi, was infected and surveilled with Pegasus at the very same time Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated and dismembered inside the Saudi consulate in Turkey. This is what that kind of technology enables: surveillance synchronized with violence. Pegasus reveals something terrifying, a global, privatized surveillance that no one is really regulating, but it also reveals that collaborative journalism can expose it. Thank you.
First learned of the impact of spyware, it was 2010. And I had just been elected as a member of the European Parliament, and I was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee responsible for Iran. And similar to how things are today, it was then impossible to travel to the country. And so the closest thing I could do is go to eastern Turkey with a human rights organization to meet with activists who had fled the repression, the crackdown on demonstrations at the time. And besides the accounts of torture, stifling of free speech, lack of access to journalists, a number of these student activists told me that when they had been arrested and questioned by intelligence services or police, they were confronted with their own communications, the people that were in their networks. And so a number of them told me that their phones had been hacked. Now, you have to remember that the context at the moment was one of great optimism about what technology could mean for human rights. It was going to liberate those who were living under repression, empower those who were disempowered, give people a voice to break through incumbent powers in media or politics. So to me, this notion that activists were being hacked was something that I wanted to look into more. And the more I did, the more shocked I was that we had an industry that is violating human rights by design, that was entirely unregulated. And at the time, not only did I learn that this technology existed and what it was capable of, but also that a number of the key companies making this technology were based in Europe. And while politicians were condemning the repression against the protesters in Iran, the companies were exporting this spyware without much challenge. I won't tell you all the details, but it was incredibly difficult to put up any kind of barriers to this kind of trade. And ultimately, we were able to use export controls to restrict the exports of spyware to some known human rights violating countries. This was all before the Pegasus Papers brought this ongoing industry to further attention, and at a time when people thought that the repressions that were most severe were happening in the authoritarian world, far away from Europe. But of course, we've since learned that a number of governments in Europe itself have used spyware against opposition leaders, against judges, against civil society activists, or against journalists. And this problem has not been solved, while over the past 15 years, the technology has become much more sophisticated. I just want to echo the point that's been made. You as a victim don't have to, quote unquote, do anything wrong to be targeted. You don't have to click on a link. There are now zero-click attacks possible, meaning that you can just be infected on your phone or your laptop without having done a thing. Now, the ripple effects of this technology have led to some very unexpected effects, at least from my perspective. For those who know a little bit about my work, you'll often hear me criticizing the outsized power of tech companies, their lack of principled guidance. And if you've listened to me recently, you know I'm not really admiring the US administration for its defense of human rights. But in regulating spyware, it was actually the Biden administration that took a leading step by saying that the US government would no longer use commercial spyware as governments. Now, of course, they have quite sophisticated capabilities of their own, and we can all ask ourselves where spyware begins, where social media, or where spyware ends, where social media begins, and what the role of all the data that we share can be in the hands of intelligence services. Biden sign an executive order banning the commercial use of commercial spyware by the US government. And of course, President Trump eradicated this executive order, so we are now back to the situation that we've been in a long time ago. In Europe, the European Parliament, but also the Council of Europe, have done critical work in uncovering the violations by the spyware industry, including by Israeli company NSO Group. And it has led to some impact, but we have to assume that until this day, European governments are still using spyware, that the lines between what is a standard of an authoritarian state and a democratic state are blurring more and more, and that as a result, human rights defenders, people like the ones we've heard from today that have been targeted by spyware will have less support if we don't choose to do it differently. So I'll end there and hope that the democracies of this world will appreciate the power of technology to violate human rights. Some of it, like spyware, is designed to do so, but that it doesn't have to be that way and that we can all make it a different place.
Funding journalism isn't charity. It's necessary investment in our democratic infrastructure. I'm Melinda Vermeer. I work at Limelight Foundation. And thanks to a community of like-minded funders, we support independent journalism across Europe, making sure that over 500 million Europeans have access to independent news. Investigations like the Pegasus Project show us why this is vital. They reveal how powerful systems, often sold to as neutral or to protect, are used to monitor, silence, and control people without any meaningful oversight. They show us that this abuse is widespread rather than isolated, that it targets innocent civilians rather than terrorists and criminals. And it brings forward the stories of people who might otherwise remain unheard. They hold power to account. In short, all these various ripples, they show us that public interest journalism is a democratic function. It's a public good. This journalism must stay alive, and it must be available to everyone. Now, looking to the future, we have a problem, though. This investigative work and the efforts to hold those responsible to account and to drive change, it's very resource-intensive and it is costly. These are technically complex investigations that we're talking about, in which over 80 journalists, activists, lawyers, technologists work together across multiple locations. And the Pegasus investigation also shows us that this is very dangerous work. Those who are being investigated are often extremely well-resourced, both financially and technologically, and they don't appreciate scrutiny. And threats like the use of spyware or legal harassment have multiplied over the past few years, and they're a huge problem to the sector. In addition, it's become increasingly difficult to actually reach people. A lot of people now get their news through social media. And the revenue models of big tech, they prioritize engagement and profit over accuracy. They show us that falsehoods travel 6 times faster than true stories, that disinformation campaigns that undermine our democracies can run rife. And this is how we elect liberal leaders ourselves. We've taken the availability of reliable information for granted, just like democracy has seemed a given to so many of us. According to the Swedish institute Fidem, however, 3 out of 4 people in the world now live in an autocracy. And in Western Europe, we're no longer immune. Our level of democracy is back to 1983. So it is fragile, and we must actively protect it. And one way of doing this is by strengthening independent journalism. The journalists and the technologists and the activists that we've heard from today, they've shown tremendous courage. But this work can't stand on courage alone. It needs long-term financial backing. And this is not charity, it's necessary investment in our democratic infrastructure. Thank you.
So after the reports, the hearings in Congress, the headlines, the years of advocacy, everything eventually comes back to one place, the person holding the phone. My father, Paul Rusesabagina, was kidnapped, forcibly taken to Rwanda, tortured, imprisoned because he spoke out against authoritarianism. And my fight for his freedom and the rights of others like him made me a target of a government that saw dissent as a threat. That is why spyware entered my life, not because of wrongdoing, but because I used my voice. And yet, the consequences don't always show up in public moments. They unfold quietly in the daily parts of our lives. It's the pause before sending a message, the instinct to lower your voice, the subtle self-censorship that creeps into conversations with loved ones. It's the knowledge that while the world debated sanctions and legal cases, someone had already treated your private life as a battlefield. This is the invisible part of the ripple, the way fear reshapes habits long after the infection has been discovered and the phone has been cleaned. And it's an experience shared by many who challenge powerful actors, journalists who uncover corruptions, activists who defend rights, and families who demand justice. Accountability matters profoundly. I've seen how slow it can be and how essential. But accountability alone cannot erase the feelings of having been watched. It cannot undo the moments you learn that a state actor equipped with military-grade spyware decided that they had the right to enter your life. And what stays with you is not always visible, but it changes the way you move around the world. And for many of us, the greatest act of resistance is continuing our work, refusing to let surveillance achieve what it was designed to do, to isolate, to silence, and to break our resolve. Thank you.